Okay, so good morning, everyone, dear delegates, dear colleagues. Many thanks for joining for the first STI Pi seminar of 2025. So we have today. So we have only Emilia and Samuel are on the slide that you can see here, but we're also lucky to have Gregor as well at last minute. So the topic of the seminar is clean tech value chains in the EU, using trade data to guide a complex policy space. So we have Emilia Timis here from the World Bank and Samuel Rosenoff, I guess you is the way to spell it out, from the IFC. And as I said before, we also have Gregor Siemieniuk from the World Bank as well here with us. So we will have a presentation by the authors of this report, and then we'll have two discussants here before we open the room for discussion. So we'll have a discussion from Antion Arambourg here, a colleague of ours, and Susanna Smidova as well will give some reflections on the report following the presentation. It's hybrid, right? So for those in the room, if you wish to ask a question to the speakers, I mean, you have to use the microphone here, and that is the case for you as well when you take the floor. And for the virtual participants, you're welcome to ask questions through the Q&A feature in the Zoom. And should you wish to speak, you can open your mic. Otherwise, you can use the chat, and we'll make sure that we direct the questions to the speakers here. Okay. So thanks a lot again for being here. You have about 40 minutes for the presentation before the discussion, and I don't know how you will organize it, but I'll let you do that. Thanks again very much for being here.
Thank you, Antoine, and thank you everybody for being here and for connecting. Again, I'm Emilia Timis. I'll just say a couple of words and benefit from the presence of Samuel and Gregor, who traveled over the Atlantic to speak today. So as Antoine said, we are presenting the Clean Tech Value Chain Report. It's part of our annual publication series called World Bank EU Regular Economic Report. This is the 10th edition. We publish this report every year, overlooking inclusive growth developments, so economic developments, but also select a special topic every year. So in the past, we looked at the green fiscal reforms. We try to evaluate the growth boost from implementing the reforms in the recovery and resilience facility of the EU and the countries and others. We chose this topic this particular time because as the institution, as the World Bank Group, we started working much more on climate in the recent years and started producing country climate and development reports and started producing those in the EU countries we were engaging. There we would look at the whole transition and mitigation and adaptation issues, but following start of those in countries like Romania and Poland, we started getting questions. Okay, these are the costs of the transition, these are the bottlenecks, but what about opportunities? So we wanted to gather the resources that we have across the World Bank Group and look at these exciting tools that are emerging to look at these opportunities. So what we'll show you today is essentially the outline of the report that is public. Gregor will talk a bit about the policy shifts and their impact. Again, we started this report about 18 months ago. So things are continuing to shift. So, but bear that in mind, that was our point of departure. And then Samuel and Gregor also continue to delve into this analytical findings from different tools and data sets that we have in the World Bank Group. So again, not without their caveats, and I'm sure the discussants will come with that after us, but we try to look at the varied what we can look at, so trade firm and some investor survey data, and then we'll come back to some industrial policy or strategy advice. Just finally, we focus on 4 countries because that's where World Bank Group has active engagements, and that's Poland, Bulgaria, Croatia, and Romania. And that's the focus of the report, and that's sort of motivation behind it. But with that, let me pass it to Gregor.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for showing up today. And I see there's many people online. I think Emilia really motivated the reports. Let me just jump in. Maybe just one more thing to say. The way we did this, we just talked to a lot of people in the World Bank to see if anybody was doing work on industrial policy, and how. And so a lot of this is just throwing things together that we could find and see how far we get. So this you'll find you'll see lots of different bits and pieces. Starting with, of course, the market situation. There's a pretty big opportunity in clean tech. So that's not green as it's often called, right? A lot of things can be green, but we're focusing on the products that you need to be green. It produce low carbon energy or use it. So for instance, you may need a heat pump that's powered by electricity in order to be able to use clean electricity, right? Rather than a gas or oil furnace. So you can see this is a projection by the International Energy Agency, how much should be deployed of all of these things in the world, and you see it's going up. So it's a growth market, and how to tap into that is the question. Currently, most of this is the market share is very high in China and the rest of East Asia, also from the IEA here. I think not the very dark blue, but the second darkest blue is Europe. So you can see that in wind, European manufacturers have quite a good market share, but in many others, it's looking a bit less rosy. So this is the situation going into this newfound interest in industrial policy. Of course, the United States passed the Inflation Reduction Act and a couple of complementary legislation in the early 2020s. And overall in the world, industrial policy is going up. On the left hand, you see a count of industrial policy measures passed around the world. That's work by Juhasz and colleagues. So we just took their measure. So it's really going up. It's the Global Trade Alert database classified into whether it's industrial policy or not, and that's what you see there. And we also then looked into what can we see what it does, this newfound interest specifically in the United States. And on the right-hand side, what you see is shares of global FDI flows, the destinations of global FDI flows, pre-IRA and post-IRA for electronic components for environmental technology. So there may be a little bit of a CHIPS Act effect in there too, but it's what we were trying to look at technology affected by the IRA specifically. And what you can see there in light green is pre-IRA, dark green post-IRA, and you can see that we see a big shift from FDI going to Asia to FDI going to the United States, with Europe being a little bit negatively affected in blue there, but overall pretty small. And of course, you can also see where the money is going in this world. But that's not our focus here, although our colleagues at the bank focus, of course, a lot on the bottom three of these. Okay, so if we zoom in a little bit into Europe, on the left-hand side, you see the same data that I showed you previously, counting industrial policies, but for our 4 countries and the EU average. Sorry, I actually don't see the slides very well. Just moving over here. So what you see is this dark line at the top. That's Poland. So Poland has been passing a lot of measures that are classified as industrial policy, and the EU average is also going up, whereas the other 3 countries are a bit more, bit lower down there, maybe with less of a trend, but overall trends going up also in Europe. And to see what's behind this, we dug a little bit into press releases by the European Commission of about investments under the Temporary Crisis and Transition Framework, TCTF, which allows state aid in specific sectors. And that framework is really the vehicle which the Net Zero Industrial Act relies on to increase investment subsidies in Europe for net zero technologies. So what you see is countries ranked by the amount of investments in terms of their own GDP. And we have three types of investments. You can invest in net zero technologies. That's the stuff, that's what the EU calls it. We call it clean tech. So that's what we're focusing on. And then you also have industry decarbonization. This is the broader green stuff, right? How can you make things green? But you have to buy the capital from somebody else. And then you have renewable energy projects. And what we see is actually until the end of our data, which was last summer, most countries actually predominantly invest in either renewable energy projects or in industry decarbonization. And only a few countries have also used this for net zero technologies. And you see Hungary and Slovakia actually, in terms of their own GDP, very active. And then you see RO, Romania, one of our 4 countries, not using the TCTF at all to invest in clean tech, but to boost its own renewable energy, which is totally legitimate, but not that much focus necessarily over our data horizon, specifically on boosting manufacturing of these technologies. Okay, now a lot's going on, and I think the Clean Industrial Plan deal. Gosh, you know what I mean. This new thing coming out just about now as part of the competition compass is superseding to some extent what we have here, but not really, because I think it's focusing more on industry decarbonization, whereas the Net Zero Industrial Act that you see there, one of the EU policy levers, was already passed, I think ratified last spring. And there's this whole set of acts and directives allowing European countries to be more active in this space. However, it's mostly setting targets and allowing support, but it doesn't really, there's not a lot of coordination, and there's also not a lot of additional financial support, although some has been redirected, such as the RRF, the Recovery and Resilience Fund. I blame it on my jet lag, sorry. But, so basically we have this EU policy framework. The question is, what can you do if you're an Eastern European country that, doesn't have a lot of fiscal space, that doesn't have the best industrial cluster ecosystem already sitting there, but is very much included in European value chains. And I'll pass it over to Sam to dig into the real analytical meat.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my first time. So I'm going to be speaking about part of the methodology, but obviously also the new results which we have. And so what the report focuses on are 5 value chains that I will talk about in a second, how we mapped them, how we validated them. Essentially, we have used the trade nomenclature of the harmonized system in its most granular definition at 6-digit to think about what are the constituting elements, what are the tradable parts from raw materials to subcomponents to process components to end products in these 5 value chains, which you see there: solar photovoltaic, wind, EV with a focus on batteries, and lately also heat pumps and electrolyzers. You can see in the bottom left, essentially an illustration how we think about the different segments in value chains. ranging from raw materials to end products. And then we have applied this taxonomy of tradable products in these decarbonization or clean tech value chains to 4 countries. As Gregor mentioned, we focus on Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, and Croatia, and we try to characterize how these 4 countries have currently exporting these 4 clean tech value chains, but also what is their potential given the ambitious goals that the European Commission has in terms of its Net Zero Industrial Act to increase its clean tech exports. And to do so, we use 3 different data sets which shed light on different angles. First, we use gross trade data to precisely apply the product taxonomy that I will talk about in a second. Second, we look at supplier-customer relationships to really understand the interconnectedness and centrality of firms participating in these production networks. And finally, we use investor surveys, qualitative data, to also complement it with the quantitative data. And I should also mention that we use 2 different concepts throughout the report. One is economic complexity, the notion that we can use export data to tell us something about technological sophistication of exports, and that's the literature from Hausmann and Hidalgo, which probably you have been hearing about. And second, we apply the lens of value chains rather than sectors at large, because with the fragmentation of production across the globe, we can actually then identify what are the constituting elements in a given value chain. And so let me talk about the first angle which we use, which is trade data to understand the participation of these 4 countries in clean tech value chains. And I think to set the stage, it's helpful to characterize a bit using standard indicators, nothing new, how these 4 countries have been trading and exporting, And so what you see on the left is the economic complexity index, again, a proxy for the technological sophistication of overall exports. And what we see is that, the 4 countries of interest have seen a slightly upward trajectory in terms of its ranking relative to others. Now, on the right, if we only were to focus on products that have environmental benefit, we see a similar trend where, for example, Bulgaria has seen an improvement in its relative position over time. Now, what we do moving forward is we have mapped these products at HS 6 digits in all of these 5 value chains. And what we did essentially is we looked at the gray and academic literature to identify what are the constituting elements across each of the value chains, but also each of the segments. And we used the 6-digit product classification, which is the most granular definition harmonized across countries. And I should also say, ideally, one would like to use production data, correct? But the problem with production data is that it's not harmonized internationally. The advantage of using export data is that customs authorities around the world actually levy their duties on it. So the data measurement is relatively well established. At the same time, I should also talk about the limitations. So once we did the product mapping, we also engaged with industry associations and customs officials who really understand the intricacies of the product codes. And so they helped us to validate false positives and false negatives, when we think about these tradable products. And so I just wanted to show you an example over here to really understand the granularity of the mapping exercise. So at the bottom right, you see for end products in the EV value chains, how the harmonized system at 6 digits classifies these products. And you can see that some of these product definitions are actually not specific enough to be 100% sure that we are talking about an EV car. So for example, the last row over here, other vehicles, including gas turbine powered, that's an example how we think about identifying, essentially finding the needle in the haystack. And so while we use the most granular definition of tradable products, it is still sometimes not enough to be 100% sure that we're capturing only these end products that, that we would like to focus on. And the second concern that we have relates to what is called dual use. So think about a machine that is used to make solar wafers. which is essentially a subcomponent in the solar value chain. So a machine in its generic form, as we have it in the HS nomenclature, could be used also for other means. So in other words, it has multiple usage categories, and we're not 100% certain that this machine is only used for the solar value chain. And so as a result, when we think about our product taxonomy, we may be overcounting the number of products that make up our value chains because of dual use and the, let's say, imperfect definition of products. In doing so, we want to also have a harmonized definition of value chain segments. So I'm just showing here how we define the different segments from raw materials and process materials up to end products, and we apply this definition across the 5 value chains that we mapped. And finally, I would like to also let you know that we have currently made available a lot of interactive results in what we call the Green Value Chain Explorer, which up to now is an internet dashboard that helps you to explore for any country for which we have trade data, the relative strength and opportunities that these countries have in these 5 clean tech value chains. But now let me go back to the first set of results. So when we use this product taxonomy that I was just talking about and apply it to the 4 countries of interest, here's what we see. As of 2022, which until a month ago was the latest yearly trade data available. We see, for example, that Poland currently exports about 3 billion of clean tech value chain exports. And the other 3 countries pale in comparison with that. Expressed in relative terms, because economies have different sizes and populations. Poland has 35 million inhabitants as opposed to Croatia and Bulgaria. We see that Bulgaria actually, in terms of its GDP, has noticeable clean tech exports. And we can further decompose what are these exports, because we have the underlying product data. So we can characterize, okay, is, Bulgaria exporting mostly subcomponents or end products? And so what we see if we focus only in Bulgaria is that, well, actually in the left, you can see that Bulgaria is overwhelmingly exporting clean tech exports from the subcomponents. And we can further characterize the economic complexity of them, And just to give you another teaser, we can go one level of analysis further down. We can look at the product level. And so what I'm comparing and contrasting here is essentially how Bulgaria and Romania are doing in terms of its product level strength. Each node in here depicts a product, a tradable product within these 5 clean tech export value chains. And what you see is, on the one hand, that Bulgaria and Romania have quite a lot of different strength. We measure export competitiveness on our x-axis. That's the typical reveal comparative advantage. But we can also think about how the market has grown in the past, as illustrated on the y-axis. So essentially, where you want to be is in the first quadrant in the northeast. And so we can do so for any country, for any subset of value chains, segments, etc. Now, the second part of our report goes beyond analyzing the baseline, but actually thinks about, okay, given the EU's ambitious scenarios for increasing domestic production increases, how are these 4 countries positioned to actually help onshore these clean tech exports? And so let me talk a bit about the methodology behind before I show you some results. So the first step in our methodology is we have to think about how the pie overall for the EU 27 is increasing from today till 2030. And to do so, we rely on the European Commission's Net Zero Industrial Act and its extrapolations of what they think how the production shares will increase from 2022 to 2030. So for example, if you look at the table here in solar, we see that in 2020, solar only represented 3% of of EU 27 deployment. But on the other hand, the EU has really ambitious goals how to upscale the solar value chain up to 45% under the baseline and the IA scenario, or even 100%. And so that helps us to justify and to think about how we model how the pie overall is increasing from today till 2030. That's our first input. And you can question these underlying assumptions, but we just take it at face value from the European Commission. If the European Commission, in other words, were to realize its goals, how much would the market grow overall for these EU 27 countries at large? The second input in our methodology is what we call an onshoring attractiveness index. It's essentially a composite indicator across 18 different dimensions, and I will talk about it. And in doing so, we try to have a coherent analytical framework around 3 different dimensions. Demand factors that help shed light on essentially pull factors that can help explain the relocation of clean tech value chain within the EU 27. Second, we also model supply indicators for the 4 countries of interest to think about, okay, what are the capabilities that these countries have? And thirdly, it is not enough to think about supply and demand. We also have to think about how do we match both. So we have to think about, well, within the EU 27, we don't have tariffs, we don't have non-tariff measures. So we have to think about other means to proxy for transportation costs, for example. How long does it take to, I don't know, to get your production from Poland to demand centers in Central Europe, so to say. And so just to give you a glance of how we model these different dimensions across demand, supply, and ease of market access, these are the 18 indicators we use. For example, for demand, we use the foreign input reliance that the EU 27 currently has to think about how can the EU 27 reduce its reliance on external origin markets? That's actually data, I think, which comes from the OECD. I'm just giving you a teaser because I can't talk about every single indicator here. When we think about ease of market access, given that we don't have variation in tariffs or non-tariff measures, we think about the bilateral logistics performance index, or we think about the driving time it takes to go from a production center in Romania to essentially demand centers in Central Europe using data from Brugge. Now, let me talk about some of the first results. So we have then an onshoring attractiveness index, which is summarizing essentially these 18 indicators using principal component analysis. And so for every single of these 4 countries and its green value chain products and destination markets, we have a single score. And we can do cluster analysis to think about, okay, what are high opportunities, what are medium opportunities, what are low opportunities. And what I'm showing here in table 2 is essentially the distribution of these 4 countries and their onshoring attractiveness scores. And what you see at first sight is that, well, Poland has a lot of high opportunities as measured with its onshoring attractiveness index. And what that translates to is in the bottom figure, Poland has the most product level opportunities compared to the other 3 countries, notably in wind, but also in solar, followed by Romania. And then what we do is we can use these 2 different inputs. How the pie is increasing in the EU 27 and how we distribute this increase in pie across these 4 countries of interest in these products, segments, or value chains. And what we see is that when we apply this methodology now to make some simulations using the EC's NZIA, we see that Bulgaria, for example, can quadruple its current baseline exports relative to 2022 levels. And we can talk about a lot of different underlying results because we can further decompose results by existing production versus new production. That's what trade economists refer to when they talk about the margins of trade. We can also decompose results by segments. That's what you see on the right. Again, we can make reference to, what are the value chain segments that are most projected to increase. We can also slice it by value chain and value chain segment, which I'm not showing here because we have a lot of different dimensions. We can also think about, okay, what are the top destination markets for these 4 countries where exports are most promising. And finally, we can also look at the underlying factors that can explain overall onshoring attractiveness, making reference to these 3 dimensions we had, demand, supply, and ease of market access. Now I'm going to talk briefly about the second data set which we use. As you know, countries don't trade but it is firms who trade. So what we do here, we go one level deeper in our analysis, and we're using firm level data to think about the centrality and connectiveness of these firm and clean tech value chains. I should mention we use fact set data, which essentially illustrates the interconnectedness between supplier and customer firms in global production networks, and we subset this fact set data for clean tech value chains. So to build some intuition, what I would like you to have a look at is first the global network representation of buyer-seller relationships. And what you see is that the blue nodes here in the network depict European countries. And so you see, for example, that the centrality of Germany and France is quite prominent. On the other hand, the countries of interest, the 4 countries that are the focus of our study, are not as prominently displayed. And so what we can do moving forward is we can then zoom in into specific countries and their firm production network. And so I just would like to compare and contrast how Polish firms, on the one hand, are really operating in a dense production network. You see a lot of connections between firms. The centrality is quite high. Compare and contrast that with how Bulgarian firms operate in more isolated spaces of the production networks. And so what that tells us essentially is also helpful to think about the effectiveness of subsidies and other industrial policies to help upgrade these clean tech exports. Because if and I think you're talking about it in a second, at the end of the day, we have to think about policy implications that we can derive from the analysis over here. So the analysis here is not in isolation, but it helps us to think about the effectiveness and distribution of policies that people are talking about. With that, I hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks. What you just saw was already a subset of firms that we identified via trade publications and lists as being part of these value chains. As you know, it's not so easy to know exactly what a firm does by only looking at its ISIC classification or so. And we're pretty confident about the firms that we showed you. But we wanted to go one step further and talk to firms to see what they think about investing in these 4 countries. And here, I just want to make the caveat that this is not a representative survey. It's whoever we managed to talk to, basically, in a very time-constrained frame. So this is the wrong clicker. What you see here is our summary of these conversations, which were both free-flowing and included a survey, which you can see here mainly, that asked firms to rank the drivers of investment. And you see 10 drivers that are ranked in descending order, so market size and prospective trends. Adam Smith knew it. Help you make investments because there's demand for it locally. And then you have the countries and how good they are both amongst each other and to relative to maybe other destinations are in these 4 columns. I'm not going to dwell on this very long, except to point out that, you see that energy costs are also a pretty big concern. This is basically 2023, 2024, early 2024, these interviews were done. But you can also see important for our countries, labor cost and availability, whereas labor cost is perhaps quite favorable within the EU, but not so much with direct neighbors outside the EU. The availability is not entirely easy, as some of these countries have, declining populations, and labor can move to other European countries. Now, another thing I want you to see is number 6, direct government incentives. It's not the biggest driver for these companies for investments in one country vis-a-vis another. And that is, of course, the TCTF framework that I showed in the beginning. So there are lots of factors that the interviews we made that came up there. Subsidies, some sort of favorable treatment for investing is one of the factors, but not the only one. And then you see the 4 countries that it's perhaps a bit of a pattern. Poland is both big and it has the best ranking here according to these interviews. Romania and Croatia are a little bit in between, and Bulgaria has the highest barriers to investment. Again, according to these non-representative interviews, it's a sample of opportunity. So what to make of this? Well, the focus of our report was really to see if there is data that our country clients can use to think about policy options themselves. But we also looked a little bit into the literature on industrial policy, which is both very old and recently burgeoning. And perhaps one helpful way to think about doing industrial policy is that you need to be able to answer 3 questions. One is why? Why do you want to do industrial policy? Do you need security of supply in a fragmenting world? Do you want to grab market shares and create jobs? Do you maybe want to improve labor standards or improve environmental performance? There can be many reasons for why you want to do industrial policy. In our case, the EU more or less sets the tone. Onshoring and jobs, good paying jobs. But then each country within can perhaps also ask, what exactly do they want to get out of this? What? Well, that's the big contentious issue, right? What are the sectors that are worth targeting? This is, I think, where we were coming from with our analysis. Well, what are they already doing and where are the opportunities? And then, of course, the last question is, how do you do this? And here we just want to give a shout out to your colleagues that made this amazing framework here. It's a 2023 working paper by Chiara Criscolo and colleagues. And sorry, and you? I'm sorry, no. Fantastic. Oh, okay, yeah. And so, yeah, I'm not going to dwell on this, except we took away from this, we added a few references to the current EU. You see some TCTF there, and you only see it in the supply within, really. So, there's a lot of things you can do, a broad policy toolkit. And I guess the real question is, how do you combine various policy levers so that the sum is more than, the sum is more than, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Let me just stop here and hand over for any clarification questions or however you want to move on.
Okay, thank you so much, Emilia, Gregor, Samuel. We will now move into the discussion. Before this, there was just one clarification question in the chat, which you can probably answer straight away, which is the Green Value Chain Explorer publicly available? You showed us this beautiful website, which all of us are very keen to use.
It is currently not externally available. I would be happy to show it to you, because it's in our intranet, and I'm making a lot of efforts to also making it externally available. What would help, and I'm being completely frank here, is to have anchor demand from outside the organization to make the case. And maybe that helps if I show to you the application in specific countries of interest, etc.
Okay, great. So you have many users in the room, including ourselves. That's one of the things that I wanted to, because the discussants, traditionally they're going to be critical, but I wanted to praise you and praise your work. We are working with some of our member countries, in particular on the implementation of the Net Zero Industry Act. So that includes Lithuania, a country very dear to Emilia. But we're also about to start helping Italy with the same sort of project. And your mapping of this clean tech value chain and all of this work that you did on these 4 countries, but that can be also adapted to any country using the same data is extremely useful for us. And so the Explorer would also be of great help. So we can do some lobbying if you want us to email some people. So I'll hand over to Antoine Arambur, who's a colleague in the PIE division. And actually, if you remember one of your slides on the onshoring attractiveness, Antoine is the one who designed this foreign input reliance indicators that you use. So now you know who is behind this. Okay, so Antoine, you have a few minutes for discussion, and then Susanna will open.
Okay, thank you, Antoine. You stole my introduction, and my congratulations and my big thank you. As we were starting this project on Lithuania, where we want to help them a bit target the area of specialization, my first mission was to look at value chains and to try to map them. And so more than anybody in the room, I think I appreciate the effort because trying it by myself, it would have taken me quite a bit of time. And I think one of the aspects that is very interesting is that you go beyond the end products and go look at the broad value chain, which is very useful because, I mean, all countries may not be able to participate or to size opportunity at the end product level, but they are very much involved in the EU on the most upstream part. And so, yes, the fact that you validate this with industry experts, I mean, that saves a ton of work, so thank you. So as I am the discussant, I have a bit of the privilege to choose what we will be talking about, what I'm going to address today, and I'm going to focus really on the exercise on specialization and the prediction in terms of export potential that you have in the paper. So just to summarize very quickly, so the exercise is based on scenarios from the EU. The idea is to say, well, if we reach those EU production targets that are quite ambitious, what will happen to the 4 CE countries that are the focal countries of your study? So this is a given. And then based on this, you build this onshoring attractiveness index that summarize 18 indicators that span 3 dimensions: demand, supply, and market access. And so based on this onshoring attractiveness index, what you build actually is at a product and export market level, so very granularly, what are the comparative advantage and where you see the most potential for each country. So you are able to tell, to have a hint on whether Poland is maybe the best place to export solar panels to France. So that's the level of granularity, and I think that's quite interesting. And then the last step is based on those relative comparative advantage, you extrapolate and on the baseline scenario that you have, you look at potential future exports. Here there is like two main hypotheses, of course. First, what you do is that you fix the export share of the 4 CE countries to the 2022 level. So what does that mean is that there is no market stealing or market losing, and we are in a very fluid state right now. As those technologies are being developed, this is changing quite fast, and I think the result could be very different if we look at market shares in 2020 or 2019, and most probably this is going to evolve quite a lot. So here there is an hypothesis that is, I understand why you make it, but it's quite strong. And then the second thing is impact on dual use. I mean, you really highlight this. This is one of the limitations. It's great to be able to look at the broad value chain, but as you look, the more upstream, this dual use issue is even stronger. Copper is part of the mapping. I mean, copper is not going to be used only for net zero, far from this. And there it's difficult to really define what will be the impact in terms of demand. And so for my case in point, Lithuania, that is very much specialized in more upstream, in like the process material. Here, like the methodology, we have to take it with a pinch of salt because this is difficult. But I would be very happy to discuss after if you thought about ways to address this and exactly, I mean, you have some hypotheses to address this, but yes. And so I think one thing that I felt was a bit missing in the paper maybe is that, predicting specialization is an uncertain business, risky business, I may even say. And so that would have been nice, to have a bit of an idea of how sensitive are your results to some of the hypotheses you make on the way you build this offshoring advantage index. Also, the fact that you fix this market share, that there is that how the results change if you relax those assumption. You also have a methodology that you could try to use to see how good it is at predicting actual specialization in the past. I mean, this is the next step. It's harder to make, let's be honest. But and finally, I think the last point is expanding the analysis. Here, you're focusing. The essence of the methodology is to have this relative advantage across the 4 countries for each product. But now, if you bring in other countries from the EU, Italy, Germany, France, that have more complex industrial landscape and that may actually be able to get most of those opportunity, notably on the end products. And here, this is, yes, it's up for question. Obviously, you can also think about the rest of the world, but the exercise starts to be very complicated. Finally, my last point is, so here you have the decomposition of the exports that the current exports in 2022 across the different country, technology and step in the value chain. What you can see is that in 2022, you have quite a bit of specialization. Poland is quite big on EV batteries, and they do a lot of end products. When you look at the results of the exercise, the specialization is much lower. And so that there is, obviously, this is a thought experiment, and policies are going to come into place and may shift specialization. But I wonder if in the initial situation, there is also other characteristics of the countries that may help us better understand what are the avenue for specialization. So I put here a few regional specialization. For example, me, I'm working on Lithuania. It's very much linked to the Nordic countries, to Poland. Their specialization and where the opportunity lie will very much depend on the specialization of the other countries that surround them. And here there is like an interaction. I think that would be interesting to explore. Innovation, specialization. We've been working quite a bit on patent, for example, could be also a good predictor. And I have other, but for the sake of time, I'll leave it here. I want to conclude again. Thank you. I think this is great work, and the best testimony of this is that I'm like replicating quite a lot of your work and trying to see how we can tweak it, how we can maybe bring some other dimension. But that's really a very nice building block for our own analysis. And now I hand the floor to Susanna, who's going to be talking about policy.
Yeah, I introduced you briefly, Susanna. So
I don't know whether you want to move on.
Let's move. Let's move on to the second part of the discussion, and then we can have a round of Q&As, and of course the authors can answer. So Susanna, you're the senior economist in the economics department in charge of the economic surveys of Estonia and Poland. And so thanks again for agreeing to discuss the paper. Maybe do you wanna use this one?
So thank you. Yes. Thanks. So hello everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to discuss this great work. Very interesting analysis, which covers a lot of ground and has a lot of interesting details in it. I definitely like the use of disaggregated trade data together with the firm level network analysis, as well as the investor surveys, which paints a very comprehensive picture of these issues at hand. I read the report with a particular focus on Poland, which is the country I cover in the economics department. And we just published the new economic survey of Poland, and I can testify that industrial policy is high on the agenda. The Polish economy can be seen as a success story, and this comes out also in your report compared to the other CE countries you cover. I think it would have been interesting to see how much of that success was driven by the policy drivers that you identified in the investor survey. Now I learned that it was not a representative, and it was it would have been interesting to maybe get some data on who were the firms, how many firms answered, what were the sizes, and just to get a feeling for it. But it could have been complemented also with the more general FDI drivers that have been covered in the literature. This leads me to a point on the onshoring attractiveness index. And what I missed there was a stronger focus on policy indicators. What can policymakers actually do to make success, to seize these opportunities arising from clean tech onshoring? If I'm not mistaken, out of these 18 dimensions that you have in there, only 2 or 3 could be directly linked to policies. At the end of your presentation, you ask very pertinent questions, and it seems to me that you don't really answer them in the report. I mean, I like your call for broader use of supply side measures, such as improving skills, improving functioning of capital markets. But again, it would have been great to see how these have evolved in the countries you cover over the time period where you have looked at the trade developments. Again, the Polish example, has the policy played a bigger role in there? Why the electric battery has evolved there better than in the other countries? That would have been nice to see. My last point is on your call in the report for coordination or even stronger central role at the EU level to avoid the race to the bottom when attracting clean tech. Now, as far as I know, regional policy remains at the level of member states, and this is quite an ambitious suggestion that you put forward for more coordination, for more central role of the EU in this area. To be honest, I think this race to the bottom has been happening already. And when we think about the FDI in general, and you could wonder, has it been to the detriment, or why is the situation now different in this clean tech? And maybe some comparison with the US, their recent episode. Is there some coordination? Maybe there isn't. Is everything at the central level? So what can Europe learn from this? So yeah, I'll stop here, and I would be interested in hearing your views on these points. Let me just maybe add to what Antoine said. I'm sure that in country studies, my colleague economists would be interested in using your tool, so we can easily join this call for making it public. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks a lot, both Antoine and Susanna. So I'll hand the floor back to the authors of the study now, and you can decide who takes the tough question and who takes the easy ones, and then we'll open the floor for questions.
Thanks a lot for your questions. Let me address your questions in its order. So I think your first question talked about internal validity. Did we do any robustness tests to understand the accuracy of our predictions, so to say? And we've thought about doing that. Now, the problem is that we only have one cross-section of data, and we are not able to define the same indicators for the onshoring attractiveness for all 18 indicators in a different cross-section prior. If we were able to do that, then we could essentially do this prediction test out of sample. And currently, we haven't been able to define these metrics, all 18 metrics, for different time period. And that is what is impeding us to do this prediction exercise. But we have thought about it. I think your second question relates to external validity, unlike internal validity. So you're raising a really good point, which is, well, we have defined onshoring attractiveness and how we distribute the pie only among these 4 countries. But to do a competitiveness analysis, one would have to look also at other EU 27 countries, because it's a relative analysis of competitiveness, correct? And so we have been asked by colleagues also at IFC, my organization, to consider the other EU 20, the other 23 countries. But you can imagine the type of data we would have to gather and structure and process. So it's quite an endeavor, but we're conscious of this limitation, as we are only essentially analyzing competitiveness within these 4 countries, leaving out whether France or some other country has actually, competitiveness and could seize agglomeration effects, so to say. And then you were talking thirdly about the drivers of specialization in value chains. And I think what is important to bear in mind is that when you look at the projections coming from the European Commission that we use to think about how the pie is increasing, a lot of growth actually stems from EV. And that's an exogenous assumption that, again, we take at face value and we don't question, but that explains, for example, why Poland, sees these specialization patterns relative to 2020, our baseline year. And so that's, in a way, linked to the EC's assumptions. I pause here, and you want to talk about?
Sure. Yeah, I can take over. I want to defend one thing that we did that I think you gave us too much of a criticism there. The 4 states can steal market share from each other, because basically, but only amongst each other, and that is a very strong assumption, both from a point of view of, well, if they're doing so well, why can't they onshore more? But also, and that's maybe the bigger worry, what if other countries move all the production to their countries? And you've actually seen Hungary and Slovakia making these efforts initially when they use these new mechanisms very intensively to subsidize production in their countries. But absolutely, I mean, otherwise everything you said was very much on point, and I commend you on following us through all of these little details. It took me a while to because Sam started this already earlier for Latin America, just a shout out to catch up with this. Now, I wanted to emphasize that I think, this analysis has a lot of assumptions, and your point about looking not at policies driving the onshoring attractiveness indicator itself is very well taken. I think one reason why we didn't really do it, because we were asking, well, given the structural setup, what could policy do, which we then don't do. But anyway, I think that would be the next step. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the policy space could flow in as a 4th dimension. But I really also wanted to say that beyond this exercise, I think the value chain data itself is very interesting. And feeding it into this predictive mechanism is only one thing one can do with it. And indeed, we have been looking how to expand the number of value chains. And what we're currently experimenting with is an AI-assisted generation of value chain mappings. So if you're interested in that, in other value chains, it would actually be interesting to know what is at the top of the agenda, as we are hoping to expand this set of value chains, and also, once we have them, make them available, because it should be a public good. So that's just as a little thing here.
Can I just come in here just to complement? And so this AI-based mapping of value chain has also other advantages, notably, and we're currently prototyping certain features, we can also try to assess what is the cost share of a given product feeding into more downstream sector of the value chain. And that's important to address the dual usage and the definition problem that we have with using the HS6 digit level. And so we hope moving forward that we have additional parameters that can reduce the measurement error we have in our current product taxonomy.
yeah, maybe just two more remarks. One still on the onshoring attractiveness index. I think there's still also an intermediate step between simply mapping the value chains and making predictions out to 2030 about about the volume of exports, which, there are many caveats, as you pointed out very well. The intermediate step, which you also showed, is that you can just count the number of products in which a country has a high onshoring attractiveness index, but then you can make assumptions. Well, maybe you can't spread your production about all of them, right? And maybe you're focusing on a few of them, which would also get you different shares across countries, maybe. But yes, I mean, you can't really predict that, I think, or you can, but it was beyond our capabilities. But so it's also, I guess, interesting to just see, maybe Poland has a larger number of possibilities for specialization than Croatia, given where the country stands right now. Okay, on your points, I hope Emilia can come in and answer the hard questions, because some of them were hard. But yeah, I think your comments are just all really well taken, and we don't have answers to what part was of existing investments were driven by these how countries rank on this matrix. We on the EU level and the coordination, it just struck us that there seemed to be a long list of technologies and everything, and this goal to scale it up, but then there didn't seem to be any plan for how to do this. I guess the comparison with the US is we often hear that a lot of the investments have gone to Republican voting states. And I don't know how that was coordinated, but it is often pointed out with great pride by the previous administration economists. Well, it didn't help them apparently win an election, but the hope is that these investments will bring some state level politicians to defend the policy as a whole, because they don't want these investments to go away, right? So in that sense, there may have been some coordination, but I also understand that a lot of Republican voting states just had greenfield and brownfield sites ready for investments. I think that and had surplus electricity supply so that these projects could get off the ground. That must have been one factor there. So yeah, I'll just hand it over here to Emilia.
No, thank you very much. I think everything is very well taken, and completely agree. I think just kind of coming back to where we started, is this was intended as exploratory work in the policy space, where we as an institution haven't been very active or vocal, or definitely not in a pro sense, or I think what we really wanted to do is to see that it is an emerging discussion, and how prominent it's getting, to at least get some of these tools that people like Samuel and others have been building inside to help the policymakers who may find themselves in that room, like, oh, we need to react, but the information is so little. So I think that was our primary objective, to inform the policymakers, perhaps without being very precise in the guidance. Although in the network analysis, we hope that that's already some sort of guiding in a way, right? Like, if you are considering subsidies as a policymaker, you can see that, or get the intuition from the network analysis, that in Poland, the trickle down to the rest of the economy, given the supplier base of about 50% of these firms that we managed to identify, would be different to Bulgaria, when it's more import-export type dynamics, right? So, but we didn't want to give very specific policy advice, especially since we didn't have the room to delve into the policy, right? The proper policy analysis with the policy reviews and expenditure reviews at the country level was just beyond the scope of our report, and therefore the policy guidance, I think, is sort of limited. In the country by country case, where we engage much more closely, right? I think that's a bit where we're pursuing a bit more, just was beyond the scope of our report. But yeah, as you say, it would have been much better. Let me stop here.
Thanks a lot. I see questions in the chat, and Jennifer assured me that we can actually allow the people in the webinar to ask the questions, because they might be easier for them to do that.
They could raise their hand and then
so Angela, maybe if you want to raise your hand, and then we'll admit you. We'll do some magic so that you can actually ask your question to the authors.
go ahead. Interaction, right?
Yeah, exactly. She cannot speak. Okay. So I'll be the messenger. So 2 questions from Angela Atri. Building off Susanna's point, how do you see the balance between national level industrial strategies and EU level coordination in shaping clean tech value chains? I think, you already touched upon this, but given all the interdependencies that you highlighted, it's definitely a very valid question. And then, what kind of policy mechanisms could help the 4 countries of relevance, and perhaps Poland in particular, avoid, these risks that, each country follows the same strategy, and then you end up in a, in a competition for attracting these value chains. These are very relevant points. So do you want to add anything on this, perhaps, that you haven't mentioned before, Emilia?
Maybe very briefly, I think nobody expects from the EU to come up with some sort of central planning type of mechanism, right? It's, I think, more informational exchange if there's no joint financing mechanism. So, and unless Gregor has different views, I think it's still just recognizing that it's up to the members, and maybe some sort of coordinating for could be helpful, but I don't know if we don't have the particular answer on that.
Yeah, and just to add to this, I think it's a common theme also on the other side of the Atlantic, that nobody really knows what's all needed to achieve these goals of producing certain things, right? And so, I guess the EU could even give a better view of what is at stake, right? Yes, there's the Critical Raw Materials Act. I guess we were looking sort of at the next production step mostly. What is there? What is needed? Perhaps this could also be a signal to investors that this is something that the EU wants, maybe. And I think the EU could be the right level of analysis to do this, right? It doesn't have to be done by every country itself. But just a general comment, I think there's also an interesting, and I'd be curious what you think about this, also in the crisis when supply chains suddenly became blocked and so on, nobody really knew very well in many advanced economies, what is the production structure of a country, and what needs to be imported and what is maybe there and could be activated. And I believe it used to be actually better. I can speak for the country I know best, Germany. I think they used to have a much better input-output table, for instance, 50 years ago than they have now. I think this kind of data generation process could perhaps lie at the EU level. It's also a big effort to really do this, I suppose. Thanks.
Are there any questions in the room?
If you don't mind, just because you're using facts and data, which is something that we looked into here in the division as well for a number of different work streams. One of the reasons why I think we kind of moved away from the idea of using it was the issue of representativeness and coverage and so on. So what is your impression there? My initial thought is that probably you have kind of like an over-representation or some bias towards larger firms, but maybe you've made some other experiences.
Yeah, unfortunately, the expert who did the analysis is actually not in the room with us. So I'm gonna try to say what she would say. You're absolutely right. I mean, you have clearly looked at this, and I think, yeah, we used what we could get, and we're a little concerned that, especially in Bulgaria and Croatia, we may be missing some domestic supply chains that are constituted of small firms that do not report their suppliers or buyers. I mean, the way it works, as far as I understand, is they basically scrape all available information from company reports that say, oh, we're supplying something to this client, or we're buying our products from that supplier. And then they just represent this in a database. You can also, I think you can see sometimes which are the largest suppliers or clients, but you don't see the size of the flows. So yeah, there are many limitations in that sense, and some of it may be driving the strength of the nodes. I can't speak to how different the representativeness is across our 4 countries. But I think given the stark difference between Poland and specifically Croatia and Bulgaria, however, we are pretty confident in claiming qualitatively that probably if you insert an additional manufacturing facility in Bulgaria, you might well not have as many spillovers in the domestic economy as if you did it in Poland. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I just wanted to note, it's not a question or anything, that the OECD has this magic database. And I wanted to make sure you knew about it because there's a lot of data on value chains and also on how subsidies are. And it's very interesting, I suppose, at least a footnote would be good on that. But the people from the OECD know that better, I suppose. No?
Yeah, we do. Thanks a lot. Yeah, it's a data set on subsidies received by companies. So it's, it's actually complementary to the work we do here in the division, collecting data on industrial policy expenditures at the country level. It's another database, but that looks really at what companies receive at the firm level, focusing on the largest companies worldwide. Do you mind saying a few more words on the, perhaps the threats to, like, you focus a lot on these opportunities for these countries. And then when it comes to what, could threaten these opportunities from getting realized, it remains much more general. So you might not have the, some good answers, but at least perhaps what kind of data do you think we should look at to try to identify what those barriers could be at the clean, for each of these value chains? Is it data on skills, for example, that we've been looking at, data on, innovation capacity? I don't know, what do you think we should focus on to think about how those opportunities might realize or not?
Okay, that's a super interesting question. So let me share one idea, which I know some of my colleagues at the bank, notably Penny Mealy, is also working on, which is essentially looking at the occupational skill requirements underpinning the clean tech exports. And so I'm well familiar with the ONET database in the United States, but I'm also aware that in the European Union, there's a similar database that systematizes occupations and skill profiles across countries and sectors. And so if you were able to link the skill matches with the export, ideally product level data or sector level data, I suppose is more realistic, then you could derive what is the skill set available and required to move actually into these new products. Because again, what we do in the analysis, we have this distinction between existing products that are already established versus new products. And one of the most pressing questions is, well, how do you actually venture into new export products that you're currently not competitive in? So what are the underlying mechanisms? And one of the mechanisms in the literature, at least, is also the capability alignment, of your existing competitive products with new products that you're not competitive in.
Maybe I can add to that. So to complement the labor supply side, on the labor demand side, I think it's very important also to look at like factors, that pertain to connectivity, etc. You remember the survey, the qualitative data, right? So the financial incentives were quite low in terms of what firms care about, even if it's not representative. So what was up there was infrastructure, energy costs, etc. So I think it's important to look at those countries. Remember, Bulgaria ranked very low in many of those, and to focus on bringing those up, right, in order to take profit, not necessarily of being at the innovation frontier, but of technology infusion and tap into those value chains. So we have a World Development Report that has a framework, and there's actually work that was specifically done on Europe, where a lot of those countries, they are actually not. So we have a framework of 3 I's: investment, infusion, and innovation. Very few countries and very few sectors are at the frontier. So it's a lot about intermediate infusion, and infrastructure plays an important role there. So that's something to look at, because for those countries, this will be the biggest threat in my view. Over to you.
Yeah, actually, there was a question coming in the chat while we were discussing this, which gets at that. I mean, they mentioned that could electricity hinder production expansion, and that's part of the, I think, the infrastructure question. And they also mentioned resource constraint related to labor, which we just discussed, but also rare earths. And I think that the question there is also whether to export and produce those goods, you need to rely on particular inputs which might be in short supply. And that could also maybe be another of these barriers, no?
I think if you remember that slide on the firm network analysis, that for me, that's the clearest the risk on when you think about the supply chains of the rare minerals or any raw materials or processed materials that we don't have present in the EU, because those buyers supply a global map. The second you start introducing these inward-looking policies, protectionist policies, or this competitive regional policies, I think that's where you see the risks of severing and the risks to any of this production. But that's the map that immediately comes to my mind, at least.
And just to say that exactly, electricity costs are high, and of course we were only asking about government incentives directly to manufacturing. But of course, there are also, you can put government incentives for making electricity cheap, right? And that's part of the TF money, TFTC money, of course, went to renewable energy generation, right? So indirectly, I mean, maybe government incentives are a little more important than one thinks in getting, for instance, in revamping your energy supply. But yeah, nevertheless, the immediate constraints, the immediate risks may lie elsewhere. And also one other risk I want to mention is that you can get industrial policy wrong. So, it's, of course, we have spectacular successes, and I think that's what's tantalizing. And you recognize if you do nothing, then others succeed, apparently. But we also have many examples where there is a poor choice of policy measures, maybe no stopping rules, and so on and so forth. And I think what's particularly dangerous about it is not only that maybe you have some failures, and the industrial policy, the general innovation literature, of course, also tells you that you will have failures, and you have to accept that, right? It's like venture capital investments. Not each of them becomes a unicorn. But you could get a bit of a backlash, right? You tried it, you did it wrong, and then you can't do it again because apparently it doesn't work, and then you have played your cards. So I think, yeah, many risks on various levels.
There was also another question on the role of carbon pricing in this FDI attractiveness or unattractiveness, and perhaps carbon pricing trajectories, like this certainty, and perhaps also in the export markets of these countries? Have you thought about this, or is there a reason why this doesn't show up?
I mean, we can speculate, but it wasn't part of our analysis in any way. But yes, of course, carbon pricing can impact energy prices. I guess on the plus side, if you actually believe in climate change mitigation these days, then it's pretty good to have a carbon price with a clear upward trajectory, because if you invest in this jurisdiction, you're actually getting the necessary support to be active and learn until the world is decarbonized, and you really don't want to be in the production centers that still emit. So I guess it's like both positive and negative aspects. From a competitiveness angle, it can be negative insofar as it raises energy costs. Yeah.
Perhaps just to follow up on Antoine's question, I think you showed in one of your slides that local demand was one of the main driver for FDI, and I think Antoine's point is that carbon pricing can increase demand for these green goods. So I don't know what's your view on that part of the question.
I think that's a great comment. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, if there are no more questions in the room or on the chat, let me check. Yes, I think I've done my job correctly. So let me thank you again very much, Emilia, Gregor, Sam, for coming here today and give this great presentation. Stay tuned for the next PAE seminar. Thanks again to our discussant, Etienne and Susanna, and to all of you for attending here or online. Thank you very much. Great. Thanks so much. Thanks a lot. So, are you working with Penny?